Thank you very much, and good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you here today, and very grateful for my education here at BYU. It was really BYU and the manufacturing engineering program that led me to BD, and it's been a great career so far. In thinking about what I would talk to you about today, I was reflecting on different leadership styles, and it dawned on me that when people describe their style, or maybe my style or other people's styles, it's usually a series of words that they use as opposed to a single word. And that insight actually serves as the basis for my talk today. So before we get started, I just want to take a quick audience poll. How many of you are engineering students? Are there any non? Okay. And how many of you are people leaders now or have been people leaders in the past? Okay, a lot of you. And how many of you aspire to be a people leader once you graduate? So get out. Okay, that's about what I was expecting. I appreciate that. So to kick it off, a little bit more about BD. BD is an $8.4 billion leader in the medical device industry, and our purpose is helping all people live healthy lives. One of the things I love about working for BD is there's a great opportunity to create shared value. That means that we can contribute to society while actually earning a livelihood at the same time. So what is leadership? Years ago, I read a book about Ernest Shackleton. And Shackleton was a British explorer in the early 1900s, and he was literally inspired by a dream. And he wanted to be the first person to reach the South Pole. Well, somebody had beat him to that, and so he set the next best goal, which is he wanted to cross Antarctica through the South Pole. And he went about preparing for an expedition, and it was rumored that he placed this advertisement in the newspaper. You know, men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. How many of you would respond to an ad like that? I see no hands, okay. Well, 5,000 men applied for basically 56 jobs, spots on 2 ships. Now, if you were to read something like that, why do you think 5,000 people would want to apply for something like that? Any ideas? Go ahead.
It's an adventure.
Yeah. I mean, clearly it's not for the wages, right? Clearly it's not because they're going to be safe. Clearly it's more than a job. There was a bigger purpose. They were inspired by a larger cause. In my opinion, one of the best leadership quotes is this: a leader is one who can bring a group of people to a place they didn't know they can go. Now, for those of you who don't aspire to be a people leader, maybe there's a corollary to that, which says a leader is one who can bring an idea to a place an organization didn't know it can go. Similar to a vector, I think leadership has magnitude and it has direction. You know, leadership is an enabler of aspiration, of ambition. It's purpose-driven change. And now normally management has certain expectations. Usually they have a certain outcome that they're looking for and there's a certain time period. We'll call that the zone of expectation. Oftentimes when I walk into a new team and I assess their capabilities, I often find that they could actually achieve a lot more than what management is looking for. And so hence, I like to set targets above the zone of expectation and stretch our teams. And some might actually call that the LOL zone. You know, they might find a target like that laughable. My predecessor in my current role, he likes to say, in the middle of ha 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 is aha. And these are the types of things that I like to encourage my teams to achieve. So why can engineers make great leaders? Well, in recent years, there have been some articles touting the significant percentage of CEOs who actually have engineering degrees. And Harvard Business Review put out something more recently where they looked at what they viewed as the 100 best performing CEOs. And out of those 100, 24 had engineering degrees. And you compare that to people that actually wanted to go into business and have MBAs, that's about 29. And about 8 had both. And so in that article, the dean of the Harvard Business School said this. He said, studying engineering gives someone a practical, pragmatic orientation. Engineering is about what works, and it breeds in you an ethos of building things that works, whether it's a machine or a structure or an organization. Engineering also teaches you to try to do things efficiently and eloquently with reliable outcomes and with a margin of safety. It makes you think about cost versus performance. These are principles that can be deeply important when you think about organizations. So engineers may approach leadership problems from a y equals f of x standpoint. I know you're very familiar with this. And so leaders define a given output, determine the critical factors that are required to achieve that output, and optimize those. So there's cause and effect, there's methodology, there's measurement. These are things that all engineers love. And you know what? Business problems are not too unlike that, although the level of precision might be different. We had an engineer that actually flipped onto the marketing side. In one of his first marketing presentations, he was asked to give a projection of sales. And he walked into the meeting, he put up his slide with his projection, and his team laughed at him. And they said, "We can tell you're an engineer because you put your projections out 3 decimal places." And in our company, we make hundreds of millions of units to billions of units per year. So they found that very, very funny. So perhaps ambiguity could be a developmental opportunity for engineers. My wife actually shared this with me from social media. And God promised that good and obedient wives would be found in all corners of the world. Then he made the earth round and laughed and laughed and laughed. Okay. Early in my career, I struggled with ambiguity. And I went to some training. It was about high involvement teams. And during that time, I remember feeling like I literally was put into a round room and told to find the corner. They had people coming from all over the company into this training, week-long, very intensive, folks from all levels. We had production associates, we had engineers, we had folks up to the VP level. Well, during the course of the week, there was one group that absolutely rejected every single thing that facilitator was trying to teach. And in the closing presentation, that facilitator declared that team a success and applauded them. And I was a bit puzzled. And so after the training, I pulled him aside. I said, "Now, you realize this team rejected everything that you taught them this entire week?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Well, how come they were successful then?" He says, "It was because that's what they had set out to do." Now, my binary mind at the mind couldn't compute that. It was not logical to me that the company would send us all this way only to have us reject the hypothesis. For me, there was a right and wrong, a left and a right. There was an answer to all problems. Sorry. And so I found that pretty disturbing. So in the corporate world, if you want to legitimize something, you got to give it an acronym or a code name, right? And so we'll call a situation like that quarter in the round room syndrome or curse. It's a situation that makes you want to curse. Well, this is BYU, so we're going to have to modify this. And so maybe we'll call this chirp, where the H is silent, and so it's an angry tweet. But it's a frustrating situation, okay? So in 2004, Malcolm Gladwell, the author of The Tipping Point, gave a TED Talk, and it was called Choice, Happiness, and Spaghetti Sauce. And he talked about Dr. Howard Moskowitz, an American market researcher who pioneered horizontal segmentation. And in the 70s, Pepsi came to Dr. Moskowitz and said, there's this new thing called aspartame. We'd like to find the ideal formulation for Diet Pepsi. We know that it's somewhere in between 8 and 12%. If it's less than 8%, it's not sweet enough. If it's more than 12%, it's too sweet. We want to find the sweet spot. So Dr. Moskowitz went about, did his research, and when the results came back, they were all over the place. It wasn't a clean bell curve. They couldn't make sense of the data. And it seemed that Pepsi was okay with that, and they said, well, that happened, so we'll just pick the point in the middle, and they picked 10%. Well, this bedeviled Dr. Moskowitz, who had a certain amount of intellectual standard, and he stewed on it for a time after, until one day he had an epiphany. And he realized that actually they were asking the wrong question. They were looking for the perfect Pepsi, and what they should have been asking is, what you should be looking for are the perfect Pepsis. And so later on, Vlasic came to him, asked him to do something similar, and he told him something similar. He says, well, there's no perfect pickle, there are perfect pickles. And then later on, Campbell Soup came to him and asked him to help optimize Prego spaghetti sauce. And when the data came back, a third of the people in the market wanted plain sauce, a third of the market wanted spicy, and a third of the market wanted extra chunky. And so the Prego executives turned to Dr. Moskowitz and says, you mean to tell us that a third of the market craves extra chunky spaghetti sauce and nobody's meeting their needs? And he said, yes, that's right. And so as a result of Dr. Moskowitz, we actually now have a variety of spaghetti sauces and pickles and all kinds of things. And so the moral of the story here is that there wasn't one monolithic approach to these markets, one that embraced customer diversity. So perhaps as with food products, if we talk about leadership, maybe there's not a perfect leadership style as much as perfect styles. You know, I've worked with leaders with all types of styles, backgrounds, cultures, and personalities. I've seen extremely humble leaders. I've seen dictatorial leaders. I've seen everything in between. I've seen well-liked leaders succeed. I've seen well-liked leaders fail. I've seen controversial leaders succeed and controversial leaders fail. So I don't believe that there's a singular style, a universal style that applies to all people in all situations. I also believe that the same set of circumstances could have different styles that could affect a good outcome. So perhaps by definition, I might be describing a situational leadership style, but I think that generic descriptor is insufficient. So let me explain. As you know, the world's a large, complex place. It's changing rapidly. The internet, economic growth, social media creates a hyper-connectedness of diverse cultures. The availability of information creates a high level of transparency, so markets change rapidly, and competition is also able to adapt much more quickly than in times past. So what's worked for us before may not work for us in the future. So to avoid obsolescence, we need to remain relevant and flexible. Secondly, I think leadership is multi-directional. For an idea or a strategy to move forward, one has to influence basically 360 degrees. So it's not just about our direct organization, but we also need to influence those beside us, and we also need to influence our leaders. And it doesn't stop there either. We need to influence not only people in our own company, but also folks in the ecosystem, in our industry, to move about meaningful change. And because each stakeholder in this complex web of relationships has a different personality, priorities, and constraints, one needs to be more agile in approach. So I don't believe leadership is one size fits all. I don't believe it's monolithic. I don't believe that it's episodic, meaning that you can use one leadership style for a period of time and then change. I view it as highly dynamic, requiring us to be agile throughout the day. So what's one to do? It just seems impractical to develop a dozen of different styles, but maybe it'd be more practical to focus on a few core capabilities. So here's the big idea. Perhaps we should focus less on style and more about these leadership capabilities, and let's call them Legos of leadership. So recently our company announced our intent to acquire a very large peer company. It's going to make us a $12.2 billion company. And soon after that, our unit vice president of R&D had a phone call with our local R&D leaders in Sandy. And he basically said this. He said, this acquisition is like someone pouring a bunch of Legos on the table that our engineers can build a number of new and exciting solutions with perhaps only limited by our own imaginations. Well, as you might imagine, Legos and engineers, that was a very powerful combination. That really fired up that team. That got them very excited. So similarly, perhaps building blocks of leadership capabilities can likewise be built into a large number of different solutions as well. So like primary colors can be mixed into a variety of different ways to produce desired colors and hues that an artist seek, so might a skillful leader mix and match primary building blocks of capabilities to produce a variety of results. Now, as we know that when building, we want as many blocks or tools as possible, and I think you've seen this quote before, to the man who only has a hammer, everything he encounters begins to look like a nail. So if you only have one tool, then your options are more limited. Now, if you're like me, you want to have the right tool for the job, a given job, and so what we want are really a toolbox of capabilities to increase our relevance. So a leader with more tools can be more agile and be more successful in a broader range of solutions. So through your experiences and relationships and education, you're all familiar with a variety of principles and attributes that might constitute good leadership. These are universal, and I know you understand them well, things like respect and trust. But for today, when I speak of building blocks, I'd really like to focus our attention on skills. Like attributes, the list of skills and attributes could be seemingly limitless. But allow me to share with you some things that I would like to have in my personal Lego set. Now, you might seek to have others in yours, and that's fine. First off, as you know, in basic Lego sets, there are two types. There are basically these base plates. Let's call those competencies. These are more foundational, they're more core. And then you have these building blocks, let's call those capabilities. These are things that are more flexible and you can arrange them in a variety of different ways. So there are 4 core competencies or foundational elements that I seek to have in my set. First, management skills. Second, authenticity. Third, self-awareness. And then lastly, diversity. These are things that are more personal. These are things that are more universal, things that you're less likely to change perhaps. So last year, in talking about management skills, I had lunch with a lawyer who has ambitions to develop into a business leader. And he asked me, what's more important, leadership or management? And I have to say, I was actually surprised by the question. I was surprised that this was still a debate, because in my mind, you need both. And this graphic shows elements of a good management system. I think that if we seek to be purpose-driven and we really want to enact change, I think it's important to be a good tactician, or at least have somebody on our team who's a good tactician to realize our dreams. Secondly, authenticity. To me, authenticity means that we're genuine. It doesn't mean that we're perfect. And like good leather, minor imperfections are actually a sign of authenticity. There was a leader that we had that was given feedback by his team, and this is a very stern, strict type of person. And the team actually suggested to him that he would be more personable, more warm. And his feedback to the team was, characteristically, I am who I am. And that pretty much was the end of it. But you know what? The team accepted that. They knew that was him. And that leader actually did pretty well. So I think leadership is personal. It's unique to each person. And to be authentic, we need to be true to ourselves, our personalities, etc. As a new plant manager, I had a phone call with the vice president and the marketing director in charge of the products that we were manufacturing. And somewhere along, and these guys were twice my age, okay? And somewhere along the way, they pulled out these toy guns that they happened to have in the office, and they were shooting each other and having a good old time. And for a while there, I know they forgot I was on the other end of the line and can hear everything that they were doing. But you know what? I love that. I really appreciated that because that was them. They had fun with each other, and they had very lighthearted personalities. I have found that I've laughed the most with my most productive teams. The third is self-awareness, and there are 3 things to consider. The first are where we're relatively strong and where we're relatively weak. In order to address weaknesses, there are 2 ways. We can strengthen them or we can compensate for them. For me, growing up, I was naturally shy. Being able to talk to people was a skill I needed to develop, and so I needed to strengthen that weakness. I worked in an organization, a very technical environment, and the leader of that organization was as non-technical as you can get. But he was extremely successful. And the reason why he was successful is because he surrounded himself with people that did understand the technology. And so he compensated for that weakness. The second thing to be aware of are self-imposed stumbling blocks. And Henry Ford had said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And in career development discussions I've had with associates, I've actually had people tell me things like, I can't because I'm a woman. I can't because I'm Muslim. I can't because of XYZ. Sometimes other people may see more potential in ourselves than we could see on our own. The third, in terms of self-awareness, is to not to overuse strengths. So humility, actually, when it's overused, could erode confidence. Confidence could actually blind us. If we're highly process-orientated, that's great, but if we trade off outcomes in exchange for process, that's not so good. And even having a detailed orientation can be overused. The fourth building block is diversity of thought. And although there are common characteristics that I look for when I hire folks, things like having a passion, a drive for what they do, a work ethic, I seek to create an environment of diversity of thought to achieve our purpose. I'm a big proponent of this. It's not because of diversity for diversity's sake. It's not because of some underlying fairness doctrine. It's really because I think it makes good business sense. And Dr. Moskowitz actually liked to quote a Yiddish expression. It says, to a worm in horseradish, the whole world is horseradish. And more recently, I read a biographical book. It was called Walk in Their Shoes, and it was about this man who worked for GE Finance, and he had a promising future with them. He decided he wanted to leave that because his true purpose in life was to alleviate global poverty, and he wanted to do that through education. And so he left this corporate job, and he went and he lived among these people for months at a time. He lived in the inner cities. He lived in remote villages. And he did that because he wanted to understand the people that he served. Well, that's great. Not all of us are going to be able to do that in our life, to get a full appreciation of this complex world, but we can hire for it. So because we tend to be a product of our experiences, diversity of thought is important for us to mitigate potential blind spots. And it's not just along racial or gender lines, for example, it's also along disciplines. So, in operations, if you're in operations, you think cost savings are number one. That's going to save the company. If you're in marketing, you think marketing is going to save the day. If you're an engineer, you might think that technology is going to serve the world's problems. But we know that there's more to it than that. So let's switch over to capability building blocks. Again, these are things that can be flexed and adjusted. There are 4 that I would suggest that I would like to see in my Lego set: agility, adaptability, scalability, and visibility. So the first, agility, and what I mean by this is learning agility. Consider the evolution of music storage. Way back when, there were folks that were world-class at making 8-track players. And nowadays, they're relegated to being a novelty. And so if you look at how this has changed, it's not just about the type, but the technologies and the capabilities required to produce these products radically changes with that market. So if we're not able to have learning agility, then we'll find ourselves obsolete. I also think that learning agility means that we learn from failures, and we learn from challenges. We learn from our mistakes. Rahm Emanuel's famous for saying, never let a crisis go to waste. Well, we should never let one of our mistakes or failures go to waste either. We should learn from them. The second is adaptability, which just means that we're able to adapt to new situations and people and cultures. Now, this might require a degree of humility. I once met a leader outside of our company, extremely visionary man, very motivational, very inspirational. He would command entire auditoriums of people. But inside his company, he struggled in working together with his leadership. And he felt he knew better, and unfortunately that pride became a derailer for his career, and they unfortunately asked him to leave. And so again, being adaptable can apply in that situation as well. Third is scalability. This is the ability to apply leadership into larger complex situations or even smaller simplified systems. I've noticed that high potential individuals, especially engineers, when they first take their first leadership assignments, they tend to be very hands-on with their team. They may micromanage them, get involved in every detail, and in some ways they feel they can do it better, and so they just can't stand to see one of their team members fall short. Well, they quickly learn that kind of approach is not scalable, because as you get a larger organization, you just can't be in all places at all times. And so the key to leadership here is being able to replicate your success through others while not having to be there 24/7. The fourth and last building block here is visibility, being accessible, seeing the contributions of the team, ensuring that contributions of the team members are visible to senior leadership. I think leadership requires a good ground game. It means that we're highly engaged with people in our organization. You just can't take an aerial view and throw out a vision and expect people will follow. You actually got to get in the trenches along with those people and understand, what they're going through and be there to help address any concerns and challenges, and also make sure that there's alignment. And then secondly, to motivate your high potential associates, visibility to senior leadership is critical. All right, so let's wrap all this up. 3 key ideas I hope you'll take away from this. Number one, the motto of BYU is to go forth and serve. As you do so, lead with purpose and impact. When you lead people in the laugh out loud zone, you take some risks, right? It's not always going to be a 100% success rate. What's interesting is I can't remember who won the Super Bowl 5 years ago, but I can tell you about Ernest Shackleton, who sailed 100 years ago. Now, Ernest Shackleton didn't succeed in each of the 3 endeavors that he set out to achieve. He wanted to be the first to the South Pole, he wasn't. He wanted to cross Antarctica, he didn't. And then he wanted to circumnavigate Antarctica, and he didn't do that either. But yet we still remember him. You know, even after that failed expedition, that second one with the Endurance, his sailors said that despite that failure, they would still sail with him. They would follow him. And so they appreciated him and respected him as a leader. The second key point, future-proof your career by developing building blocks, because as you're agile, you're able to adjust to different circumstances, different teams, different environments, and you're able to be more relevant and valuable to your company. And third, make it your own. As you do this, build these Legos of leadership and arrange them in an authentic way. You can create a number of different possibilities. And this will enable you to be agile, exercise real-time leadership, and remain relevant in a fast-changing world. And as you pull together these different mosaics that are uniquely configured because of the different types of capabilities that you turn on or off at a given time, you begin to paint a picture. And hence, that's the art of leadership. So thank you for your time and attention. So I'll be happy to take any questions. Go ahead.
And then, as far as like engineering goes, future-proofing your career kind of seems a little bit hard to do because it's constantly changing.
Mm-hmm.
You expect it to change a lot in the next couple of decades.
Right.
Like, what would you say would be the most valuable way to, like, the most valuable things to build to be able to future-proof a career in a technological engineering world?
So the question is, how could we be more effective at future-proofing our career? Again, I look, as opposed to a specific, I look at capabilities, and I'll define capabilities as the ability to acquire competencies. So if I'm a master at building an 8-track player, do I have the competency to start making MP3 players? Do I have that learning agility to be able to develop those new skills? And that's what I would suggest, is being agile in our ability to learn. Go ahead. Yeah.
I guess when you talk about like building your skills, what I guess is there like a certain process that you go through every time, and just like you personally, what do you usually do to improve the tools that you have for the?
The question is, how do I improve my toolbox or skills? I observe. I watch people around me. I look at both examples of success and as well as things that are less successful, and I seek to incorporate those into my life and into my style. I like to read. I think Stephen Covey was famous at saying he feels guilty sometimes for teaching the gospel. You know, in all these leadership books, he's basically teaching the gospel. And so everything that you need about leadership is right in the scriptures. So there are a variety of ways. Other questions? Go ahead.
Can you talk about some failures in your life and some things that you've learned from and benefited from those?
How much time do you have? A lot. I'll give you a work example. I was associated with a product category that was on its tail end of its life cycle. And the basis of competition have shifted so much it was beyond our current core competencies. And so we were trying to do the best we can with what we had. We came up with a novel program, and it required the use of a partner outside of our company. And it was pretty exciting. You know, it basically reinvigorated the possibilities for this category. And senior leadership got hold of it, got very excited about it, and this thing just kind of took off. And we recognized the risks of having it develop so quickly. We actually wanted to pilot it at first before we launched it across the company. But again, there was a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of pressure to try to change this business. Well, ultimately, it did not succeed. Our third-party company actually left the market. And we knew that was a risk, and unfortunately that came true. And so here we were launching this program, and it didn't turn out the way we thought. And so in hindsight, and reflecting on that, I would want to manage expectations better and probably take a harder stance in helping senior leadership to understand that, you know what, this is still in infancy. We're still learning here, and to prevent that from happening in the future. So that's just one example. Other questions? Greg?
So if you could, I'd like for you to address what would you recommend to students here at BYU in engineering on taking advantage of the opportunities that are available to them now to better prepare them for their career, particularly in the people interfacing in leadership? So.
Get real-world experience. I think if you can get internships or jobs, summer jobs that get you out in your field of choice and get practical experience and working with teams, I think that's invaluable. Go ahead.
On that note, are you taking applications?
We're always looking for good help, especially cheap college students. We have no shortage of things that we need to accomplish in very confined budgets, so we're trying to be creative. Yeah. Other questions? Go ahead. What is the most common mistake for leaders? I would say that most leaders that I encounter are very confident, and that could lead to blind spots. So we think we have all the answers, and we go charging down a certain direction without the benefit of experience of those around us. And I think, again, confidence can blind. And so I think it's important to be deliberate about recognizing the viewpoints of those around us and considering those before making big decisions. Any other questions? All right. Oh, go ahead.
Did you know that you wanted to be in a leadership position when you first started out after you graduated with your degree? Or how did you end up to where you are, I guess?
I think I've always known. I think I've always known I wanted to be a leader. I know when I graduated here, I had every intention to go on for my MBA, so I knew I wanted to get beyond engineering. Just to put a plug in for manufacturing, learning leadership skills is so much easier in a manufacturing environment because there are more opportunities to lead groups of people. I've known marketers that have come up through the marketing path, and their challenge is to actually get leadership assignments so that they can progress in their career. In fact, early in my career with BD, they actually sent one of our marketing leaders to a manufacturing plant for 6 months as a second shift supervisor so that person could get some leadership experience. But I think I've always known, and it was something that I set out to do from very early on. Any other questions? Go ahead.
How did you balance your career and your family? Because of course, have been very successful, but at the same time, you need to leave time with your family. And I, know that you just moved here from a different plant. So I guess how did that affect your family, and how did you make those decisions?
Maybe I should let my wife answer that. There are trade-offs. There are definitely trade-offs, and naturally moving around as much as we have is not for everybody, and there have been sacrifices made. You might want to ask our kids that right after this and see what they thought about moving around. I would say that there have been sacrifices made, for it for sure. I think I actually saw one of the talks that was given here, and somebody had said that if your life is particularly doing well in one area or another, maybe it's not in balance. Yeah, maybe there's some more rebalancing I need to do here. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much for your time and attention. Thank you.